This is the concierge, sir.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Concierge Confidential. I'm your host, Brian Ortega, and in today's episode, we are going to be starting our series that I've really been wanting to do for a very long time. It's the Vegas Icon series, where I'll be highlighting a Las Vegas icon that I think had a huge effect on the city of Las Vegas. Our first one is going to be a little bit controversial for a lot of people, and that is because he no longer is really in the city or the state of Las Vegas or Nevada, and that is Steve Wynn. Steve Wynn is essentially the godfather of the new Las Vegas, and he's opened many of the hotels that you now see as iconic in modern history. But the reason it's sort of hard to talk about Steve Wynn sometimes is because of his involvement with this sexual harassment lawsuit or sexual harassment allegations that was never charged for, and then also was never had to stand in court, essentially because there was lack of evidence of these things happening, which doesn't put away any of the allegations that were put. It's just really one of those things where it happened during a time where a lot of people in industry were being accused and convicted, a lot of them, of sexual harassment. So we're not obviously condoning any of that, but we're going to really focus for this particular podcast on how Steve Wynn affected the gaming industry, the hotel industry in Las Vegas, and the city of Las Vegas itself, and its current identity. So we're going to be highlighting that in this episode. If you have trouble sort of listening about somebody who's been accused of that, this may not be the show for you, because we're here to celebrate the things that have to surround what happened in Las Vegas in terms of what was built in the city. So sorry about that, but you really can't talk about new Las Vegas without talking about Steve Wynn. So we'll be jumping into that with that little precursor. Coming up next, we're going to be doing our Las Vegas Icon series, starting with Steve Wynn. Okay, everybody, so with that kind of out of the way, talking about all the precursors to this particular context, Steve Wynn essentially is the godfather of modern Las Vegas. He was essentially Mr. Las Vegas for a very, very long time. So the funny thing is that Steve Wynn doesn't come from really a hotel background. He actually got his degree in English literature, which I thought was art history for the longest time, but English literature from the University of Pennsylvania. And then he was actually supposed to end up going to another Ivy League school, but what happened was back in the 1960s, his father died, who had amassed a very large gambling debt. It was $350,000 in gambling debt. So he actually dropped out of school after he graduated University of Pennsylvania, or Penn, or University of Pennsylvania. And he took over the family bingo parlor. He's supposed to go to Yale, for those of you wondering. With that being said, essentially his story starts in Las Vegas in the 1960s, so 1967 to be exact. So one of the things is that he owned that bingo parlor, and then it was also one of those things that doesn't get reported a lot, is that he did have a small stake in alcohol trucking in Las Vegas, and that would deliver to all the hotels. But that was a very small part before he ended up becoming a minority owner of the New Frontier Hotel and Casino, which is currently an empty lot, which is actually where the Trump Tower now is in Las Vegas, or the Trump Hotel. So he owned he was a partial owner of the New Frontier in 1967. And then as we kind of make our way through the decade in owning that particular property, he also needed to get a loan for that. Do I want to jump into this next? So essentially Steve Wynn, for those of you that aren't aware, his actual name is Steve Weinberg. So they reverted it to Wynn because obviously the connotations of, being Jewish and all that. Also, at that particular time, so the family changed the name to Steve Wynn, or Wynn, essentially. So he's from, like I said, New Haven, Connecticut, but grew up really very much in Pennsylvania, and that's where he ended up moving to Las Vegas in the 1960s to own the New Frontier. With that being said, then he ended up buying a controlling interest in the Golden Nugget Las Vegas. So That's really where Steve Wynn's story starts in Las Vegas, like really where he becomes, and you start seeing the innovations that come through. So before I get into talking about, Steve Wynn at the Golden Nugget, I do want to explain sort of why he's kind of important in the city. One, he was integral in making Las Vegas a tourist destination for really everybody, because for a very long time, Vegas had the connotation of being, a mobbed up city, very dirty, sin city. Can't go there without something bad happening. So he turned it into a city where tourists would come. It was a destination you come with your families, and really prospered during the family-friendly time of Las Vegas. But then there was a certain time where he wanted to have more luxury properties. He's a very, influenced by the arts, and he also he loves to collect. Is a collector of art as well. So he wanted his hotels to really reflect that, which is why you see a lot of the later hotels owned by Steve Wynn were really focused on delivering luxury. But he knew that back in like the early 90s is that's not what people wanted to have luxury, but they didn't want it to be at an outpriced price point. Does that sound anything familiar? So he knew what to deliver to audiences at that point of building stuff. So let's get back to the Golden Nugget. So he ended up getting controlling interest of the Golden Nugget in 1971, and then that's where he started to revamp the hotel. The Golden Nugget was opened back in the 1930s, 1940s, and it needed a refresh. Obviously, it was in a totally different time of history. So with that being said, he actually ended up opening its first hotel tower in 1977. And from there, he had a bunch of other enhancements like restaurants, obviously expanding the casino. And one of the major things was that he ended up bringing Frank Sinatra in to be a headliner along with Dean Martin. So the thing was that this is very much in the back end of Frank Sinatra's career, just because really when you think of Vegas in that time period back in the 50s and 60s, you think of the Rat Pack. So people understood that Frank Sinatra was synonymous with class and the golden era of Las Vegas. So he knew that it was very important to bring these big entertainers, sort of the classic Bugsy Siegel thing, where Bugsy Siegel was like, hey, we need all these big performers to come into town, because then if they come into town, everybody wants to be where the big performers are. So this is not something new that he innovated, but I would definitely say that he innovated the way of promoting properties like they were industry, essentially. You sell it like it's a commodity, of course. And people didn't really think about hotels that way back in those days. They thought of it as, in Las Vegas specifically, a place you would come, you would have a place to stay while you went to the casino, had cheap buffets, you ended up having, very cheap food, drinks, sometimes complimentary, and then, really good shows that would essentially entertain the ladies, or a place to go for, an hour and a half at night before you end up continuing to gamble. So nobody really thought of Vegas as like an incorporated city where you would have all these different types of hotel resort atmosphere that you would get nowadays. It was very, very different. You would come to Vegas, usually, single or alone. And the 70s were very interesting, because the 70s is really when a lot of corporations started taking over a lot of properties. That's when you get a lot of Howard Hughes properties coming into town. For example, he ended up buying lots of land out in the different parts of town. And he, of course, ended up buying the Desert Inn. He ended up buying, I believe, the Sands as well at some point, the Silver Slipper, and a couple other properties sort of along the Strip. And they actually had to stop them. It became an antitrust issue where you couldn't own that many hotels on the Las Vegas Strip, which is now why you actually have to have a board of directors, essentially a corporation that owns a hotel. You cannot be a single owner of a hotel anymore in the city of Las Vegas. Although, if you look around the city, you'll notice that we have about 25 hotels on the Las Vegas Strip, and we have about 7 owners of all of those hotels. So just depends on how you want to word antitrust issues. So with that being said, as we kind of go down the timeline of Steve Wynn in Las Vegas, during this time is where he amasses a large sum of his fortune, where he ended up investing in lots of other hotels in Atlantic City, and then also places in along the eastern seaboard. And that's where he's able to capitalize on the legalization of gambling in New Jersey. So in 1976, that's where he ends up coming with the idea to open the Golden Nugget Atlantic City, and it was one of the smallest local places in town, and he ran that for a very long time, and then he ended up selling it in 1987 for $440 million. So why is this important? So what makes this important is that gives him some of the money, along with high-yield bonds, which he ended up getting issued by Michael Melkin, which bonds are high-yield bonds in general, were very important to the construction of the late 80s and 90s hotels. So that was very, very important at that time. You didn't just come in with a corporation because you had to get loans from banks, just like you do nowadays. Like, look at the A's, look at the Raiders. They do the same thing when they build their stadiums. So in 1989, we come up with the Mirage Hotel and Casino. The Mirage is very important to Las Vegas history because it essentially marks the turn into modern Las Vegas. So you can essentially put Vegas in like three different time periods. You have Vegas from, the turn of the century, the 1900s, till essentially 1931. That's the time before gambling, which is very much a mining town, very much a stopover for trains, of course. And then, of course, the construction of the Hoover Dam. And then in 1931, we legalize gambling. And then from 1931 to essentially the 1980s, so that sort of whole section in time, you can encapsulate sort of the mobbed-run Las Vegas. And then, obviously, golden era of Las Vegas was in between there in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And then you get into sort of the dark period, which is between 1970 to 1989, where then we end up opening the Mirage Hotel, which really launches Vegas as a tourist destination. It was the first mega resort as we know it today. Integrated resort is what we like to call them, where essentially what that meant was that it was a place that you visited Las Vegas so you can go to the Mirage. Back in the day, it would be you would visit Las Vegas and stay at a hotel. You visited Las Vegas and stayed at the Mirage Hotel and Casino. This is where they had huge restaurants. They had amazing free shows in front of the hotel with this giant volcano that you could see from miles down the street. Strip was much smaller back then. And then they also had the amazing Siegfried and Roy, which came in a year later. But it had this really cool idea about being sort of like an oasis in the middle of the desert, which I know that wasn't his words that he said. I actually listened to a interview that he was doing, and he said that this is his idea for creativity, which Steve Wynn was a very creative gentleman when it came to building hotels, and sort of his philosophy on it was that the big sort of overarching thing about Steve Wynn is that he didn't approach hotels as like of course, to make money. That's, it's a business. But he looked at them as pieces of art, essentially, and how he could deliver on the promise of what you're going to get when you come to that hotel. And that would be, and I think he really learned this sort of working in hospitality for all those years before he built the Mirage. He understood sort of like what made people tick, and I think he really wanted to make hotels beautiful. I think that was sort of his art. And then he found out that working in hospitality, there are layers to what makes everything go. So his idea for creativity for building things was that he was standing outside of the Mirage property, and he was looking at it, and he says, I want to have this place that has this southeast tropical theme with palm trees, coconuts, all these leaves, bananas, this whole thing, this sort of oasis essentially. But how does that look against a desert background? Those things don't go together. And he has this idea of thesis and antithesis, which was from a book, a person that said this, that he read. My goodness. The Heigl system, where you take something that you believe and then look at the other side, which is the antithesis, and you say, why does this not work? And then you kind of in between the thesis and the antithesis is where you come up with that synthesis where you find the answer to the problem in between the two. And that's where his creativity essentially was coming from, is that if I can make the outside as attractive and beautiful as the inside is, that's what I want to deliver. I want people to see the outside of the building and say, oh my God, the inside, what could that thing look like? And get people into the hotel. And the hotel is beautiful. It's sprawling. It's essentially at the time perfectly built. As we go through, it was totally different than back in the 1950s when we built a lot of the hotels in the 60s, where you'd walk in, you'd have the main driveway, and it had to be accessible from the street, or you had parking in the front. That's essentially where it went. You had parking in the front, you walked into the hotel, and then boom, you're in the middle of the casino. The Mirage is very different. The Mirage essentially has this giant volcano in front of the hotel, where you're not able to access it. You can watch it from the outside. No one would ever seen this. Could you imagine being born in, Iowa? Sorry, Iowa. I pick on you guys a lot, but you're Iowa. So love Iowa, by the way. Great people in the Midwest. But let's just think like you're like in the Midwest in the 1980s and you come to Las Vegas and you see a volcano. Could you imagine being from the middle of the country that maybe doesn't travel very much, which, what it is, and seeing a volcano on the hour, every hour at nighttime? It must have been fantastic, depending on where you are in the country. If you've never been out of the country, this was a place that you can see a natural thing, natural in quotation marks, happen every hour. You can see this volcano. It has the music. It has sort of the thing to pull you in. And if it's this cool on the outside, what does the inside look like? He brought world-class chefs into the hotel. He had a beautiful casino floor. State-of-the-art sports book, which became more popular as we got into the 70s and 80s and the 90s, obviously. And this place also had dolphin habitat on the inside, which is so cool. But this place had to be totally different than things like, let's just say, the Sands, which essentially was had rooms for gambling, and then they also had, of course, the hotel rooms themselves, and of course maybe a buffet, a cafe, maybe a steakhouse. But this place essentially was a travel destination where you never had to leave the property. And that was the genius of it. You made the property so wonderful on the inside, besides just being beautiful, that you never wanted to leave. Why would you want to go to some place that wasn't to this caliber? And sometimes when you're the first at something, that puts you in the pole position. And he really set the template for what Vegas casinos should be like in the next 20 years. And it's just like anything else. You have people that built like Flamingo, the Sands, the Dunes, Tropicana, and they're working off a template of this is what a casino is, this is what we should offer. But you do need somebody who's going to think differently and think outside the box to create something that you've never done before. And with that being said, the Mirage ended up opening in 1989. And then from then on, we had this just boom of casinos being opened and, of course, closed from 1990 essentially until 2001. So how many hotels opened? I believe we had 15 hotel openings between 1990 and 2001, which is astounding when you think about from 2000 and let's just say 11 to 2026, we've essentially had three new hotels open in Las Vegas. You've had the Circa open, you had the Fontainebleau open, and you had Resorts World open. So that's three properties that opened in that time. And we've had a lot that have been redone, like, Virgin, of course. We imploded the Tropicana, of course, but essentially, like, we haven't had new properties open in that time, which is, one of those things. So it's just more expensive. That's also part of it as well. An important thing to remember is that none of these hotels had cost over $1 billion to create, which is important down the road. But the Mirage opened in 1989, and after that, the next big giant year for openings was 1993, which is when we had 3 hotel open in 1 year. We ended up having the MGM Grand. We had of course, Treasure Island, which we'll get to that in a second. And then we also had, my goodness, what else opened in 1993? Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on it. I have to come back to it, but we had a third hotel open. I want to say it was New York, New York. It might have been 94, but we did have a third hotel open in 1993 that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. So with that being said, was it the Luxor? It was Luxor. So anyways, going back to Steve Wynn. So with that being said, Steve Wynn ended up opening the Mirage and then moved on to the Treasure Island, which opened right next door to the Mirage because it was in the parking lot. So it was quite convenient for him to build a hotel right next door to that property. So the Treasure Island is essentially a copy and paste idea of the Mirage, where they had this big giant show in front. We wanted to replicate that by building the pirate ships in front. And this was very much in the heart of the Make Vegas Cool for Kids era of the city. So that's why they built that first show was so cool. It had this big giant ship that would sink, and then they ended up, having these like big giant pirate battles, lots of people in front. It's really, really cool. If you do want to like see an old video of it, if you watch Miss Congeniality 2, they actually have a whole scene surrounding going into the pirate ship and saving one of the characters. But it's a really fun way to see sort of like that show in all of its glory before it was changed, and then they no longer have that show anymore either. So that really sucks. But anyways, so once they opened it, this really was... He definitely has a thing with like Southeast Pacific was really what he was really into at that time, because it was a way for him to mold like the desert landscape against something that, was water based. But yeah, the Treasure Island very much is very similar to the Mirage in terms of how it was built, sort of its size and the maneuverability, of course. So quite similar to the Mirage. Oh, funny. It was open on my brother's birthday, October 26th. Shout out. So, anywhooser, the big deal about him opening the Treasure Island, which is where we start our journey into the luxury portion of Steve Wynn's sort of fascination with the city. So, why do I mention that? Because we're going chronologically, that's why. But the Treasure Island, at the grand opening of the Treasure Island, he came up with the idea to build the Bellagio. So this obviously was before that. But when they came up with the idea of this, they ended up doing a whole experience where they had an implosion. So this wasn't at the opening, but they ended up having an implosion of the Dunes Hotel, which Steve Wynn had purchased. The Dunes Hotel is currently where the Bellagio now sits. So the big deal about this was that he got on one of the ships and he was standing next to the captain of that ship, and he said to the captain,
"Captain of the Britannia, are you ready, sir? Prepare broadside. Ready, aim, fire!"
So with the dunes coming down, that created the opening for the construction of the Bellagio Hotel and Casino. And the Bellagio at the time was the most expensive hotel built in the world. It also was the first hotel to cost over $1 billion, which we kind of laugh at that now because, it's to build a new hotel on the Strip, it's going to cost you at least $4 to $5 billion now. So it doesn't really count. But at the time, it cost $1.6 billion to build the Bellagio Hotel. So
bye-bye Dunes.
Bye-bye Dunes, and hello Beau Rivage. That's the newest project.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it seems like America has been buying whatever Las Vegas has been selling here for about 60 years. And we've had big hotels, we've had exciting hotels, we've had colorful hotels. What we're going to try and do is build the most romantic hotel that has ever been. Now, that's a very challenging kind of thing to do.
Yes.
But we're going to make it the kind of a place where people go not only to have fun, but where they think of going to fall in love.
They had two designs, essentially, which is kind of the funny part, is that they have two hotels that were built very similar in time. That was the Bellagio and the Beau Rivage, which the Beau Rivage is actually located in Mississippi. And that design was actually supposed to be for the one in Vegas, and the one in Vegas was supposed to be for the one in Mississippi. But they decided at the very last minute that they wanted to design it using that design. The better one was the one that was supposed to be in Mississippi. And they were going to call it the Beau Rivage, but they thought, you know what? After visiting that wonderful city, I believe Lake Como, they said, I want it to be just like that. So they named it Bellagio. So Bellagio, if you ever look at the front, they have those little sort of facade buildings in front of it, obviously behind the lake, is that those are supposed to look like Lake Como, which it's similar to that. And when they built that lake, it's 8.5 acres, if you're wondering how large it is. And it was, again, all three of these properties, the Mirage, the Treasure Island, and the Bellagio, all have a water feature in front, which became really his signature on his hotels, that he would have these beautiful water features in front of the hotels. And if you ever actually listen to Steve Wynn talk about his properties, he always has a very romanticized idea of these buildings because, again, he's, I think, more of a creative person and also a salesperson, of course, because he sells these properties. And he knew that you had to create a personality for your properties for people to understand what to expect from them. And essentially, when you see Steve Wynn do any of these commercials, everything was big. I think he understood what Vegas was at that time and what people's idea of Vegas at that time had become. It had become that this is an showmanship game. It's big, it's loud, it's luxurious now. It's where I can go gamble. It's where I can go be somebody else. And I think that's where he really understood what the city was about. And there's a really cool interview that he does on his Instagram. He does like these little videos every so often, is that he explained what the secret to Las Vegas was.
Is there a secret to Las Vegas? Yes. Yep, there is. You see, it was about freedom. People live a normal life at home. And then they'd set aside some money, a budget. And that money would be used to go to Las Vegas. Spend it the way they want. Live big. Get a little crazy. Stay up late. Drink. Go to shows. Maybe gamble. All the bright lights. The freedom of Las Vegas to behave a little crazy. The town gave you permission. It was all about the freedom to indulge yourself. That was the secret of Las Vegas, and it's real important that not change. Gotta be careful in Las Vegas today that you don't start telling people how to spend their money. Charge you too much for parking. Charge you for a massage or a spa fee, even if you don't go to the spa for a massage. Even if you don't rent a lounge at the pool. Best not fool with the freedom of Las Vegas. And when I mean the freedom of choice for people to spend their money the way they want.
And I think that's so right. I think that the freedom is what makes Vegas different than every place else. And I believe when he says that, you know, when you start putting limits on what people can do or putting price tags on things that what people can do in the city, that's when you start to deteriorate what the idea of Las Vegas is or was, is that freedom to go in and out of different casinos, freedom to go in and out of different bars or nightclubs and that kind of thing. When you start putting too many barriers in between that's when it becomes a problem. So I think that's true. I think the freedom to do or be or, you know, experience whatever you want in the city is the secret to Las Vegas. Again, it doesn't mean everything has to be free, you know, money-wise. I don't think that's the answer because, again, it's their businesses. But I think there's ways to make people feel like they should be here and feel what they want to feel, what they think of Las Vegas. Everybody experiences Vegas differently, and I think that's the cool thing about Vegas now. But I think what he also really understood was that I'm going to start building hotels the way that I wanted them to reflect, you know, himself, which was luxury. It's high class. And yeah, the Bellagio when it first opened had really weird rules. Like you had to be, I think, 18 and over, which, you know, some hotels you have to be 21 and over, like Circa, but it's easier because they're, you know, not on the strip. But you couldn't take, I believe, This actually happens at the Wynn later, that you couldn't take strollers into the hotel. It was like an adult-only hotel. And again, that sort of pushes up against some of that, but it didn't last very long. But the Bellagio was unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. It had this beautiful, big, giant, opulent lake. And it really is something to say, you know what, we're going to take 8.5 acres and make it something where you don't make money off of it. That is miraculous. It's really, it's really crazy to think that. Could you imagine somebody right now that owns a hotel that says, yeah, we're going to put something in front of our hotel on the main street, and it's not going to make any money for us? You can't. You wouldn't. You would never see it ever again. It just never is. It's never going to happen, because every single acre, every single square foot has to account for a dollar made, which really sucks. I think that's really the shitty part about New Vegas, is that every square foot in the casino has to be accounted for how can it make money. And again, it's a business. It's not, we're not doing charity here, but there's a way to do things like this where you can actually increase the square footage inside of the property that you have by enhancing the feel and look to that property. And I mean, nobody knows, what they're going to do when they put something in front of their hotel, but the Bellagio fountains have become really a Las Vegas landmark. It's a staple to the city, where it is the centerpiece whenever we do anything in this town, especially on television. That is the most important thing to see when you're watching TV. It emphasizes the luxury and beauty of the city at the Bellagio Fountains. So that's actually my favorite landmark in the city, is the Bellagio Fountains. It's really, really fantastic. But when they opened the hotel, it exuded beauty when they opened the Bellagio. When you walk into the main entrance or into the main lobby, you have the wonderful Chihuly hand-blown glass flowers, which is the largest single-form hand glass sculpture in the entire world. It's gigantic. It's beautiful. It's iconic. It's one of the things that people would come and say, oh my God, I can't believe they built that. And then if you keep walking through, they have the beautiful Botanical Garden. Probably the most visited thing on the Las Vegas Strip is the Botanical Garden. The Botanical Garden, which changes 5 times a year, you guys have probably heard me talk about it, is wonderful. It's a staple for Christmas time, where you end up going and you have hot chocolate and you walk through it, take pictures, everybody stops. I do have little issues with the modern day Botanical Gardens, because when they first opened the Botanical Gardens, it's also free. So many things were real. So many flowers, a lot of the plants. Also, if they had to sculpt something, they used these, I believe, seeds. They were like flower seeds, and then they would have like different, they would tint them different colors, obviously. And it was amazing. Now you can tell that it's owned by a corporation, especially recently, that a lot of the flowers are not real, which, sucks. That's no fun. Because, that's the fun part about the Botanical Gardens. You're like, oh my God, they did this all with real flowers and real roses. And when you make things that are, make them fake, it does sort of dampen how people feel like the amazingness of that exhibit. So, yeah, kind of a downer. But when it first opened, they didn't have a spa there. So for those of you that have seen the movie Ocean's 11, the one with, obviously, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and George Clooney, there is a scene where Julia Roberts comes down this beautiful staircase, this big, giant staircase. And as she comes down, she is coming down from the art gallery, which is on the second floor of the Botanical Garden, which, yes, you can go find it if you'd like. It's no longer there, which is very sad. It's rumored that we'll get to this in the timeline at some point, that when MGM Resorts bought those properties, the Bellagio, the Mirage, and the Treasure Island, that they took out the staircase, this is allegedly, because the owner of MGM at the time did not like Steve Wynn, and that he wanted to erase all the things that signified Steve Wynn on the property. Obviously, you can't erase everything. You can't erase the Bellagio fountains, but Steve Wynn's favorite thing at the Bellagio was his art gallery, where he kept a lot of his Picassos and Monets, a lot of his artwork, and they took out the staircase. So now they have a spa, because that's where the spa and salon goes. But yes, if you're ever wondering, like, where is that staircase? Why can't I find it when I'm watching Ocean's 11? It is no longer there because of that reason. Also, a funny story about, when Ocean's 11 was made. It was made during, I believe, the summer or winter of 2000. And that's when they actually sold the hotel. So when they were, negotiating this, Jerry Weintraub, the guy who was the producer of Ocean's 11, approached Steve Wynn and said, hey, I'd love to shoot a movie inside of your hotel. You would be the centerpiece and so on and so forth. And in between them talking about doing the movie and then it actually being shot, it was sold. The hotel was sold to, MGM Grand Incorporated. And the funny thing is that everybody was freaking out, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then they found out that Jerry Weintraub was like, oh, it's all good. I know the owner of the new property and we can still shoot there. So that was a really funny thing that happened in between there. But thank goodness it didn't, because it really is a beautiful time capsule of when the Bellagio was the newest and grandest thing in the world. It was really the most beautiful hotel resort ever made up until, the Wynn was created, and other properties, of course. But with the Bellagio opening, he brought people like Julian Serrano, Le Cirque, Michael Mina, a bunch of different celebrity chefs started coming into town. And of course, one of the places they wanted to go first was the Bellagio. Just beautiful. Just any restaurants that are on there, you get a just wonderful view of the hotel across the way, which is the Paris. But with the Bellagio opening, that really closed the door on family-friendly Las Vegas and then turned it into becoming the luxury destination, the party city destination of Las Vegas. It's everybody grew up. Everybody grew up during the early 90s, mid 90s, and then early 2000s, it was party time, because that's when we started opening up more big and beautiful, luxurious properties like the Venetian. Palazzo came a little bit later, 2006, I believe. And then you also had places like Paris opening across the street as well. So it really was a time of transition in the late 90s from family-friendly Vegas into this luxury-branded idea of what we think of Vegas now. So I think it's important to note that the reason that I think Steve Wynn is so important to the city is that he really was somebody who understood what he wanted and created trends. He was the one who created or looked for something new and bigger or more luxurious or more expensive, which many people would say that's, why we have such expensive hotels now. But he always was coming up with the idea for something new, which I think the problem with our current Las Vegas owners, our Las Vegas property owners, is that they are just there to manage. They're there to manage the properties that they have. They're not thinking of how can I build something new in the city? How can I do something different? Bring this type of person into the city. We're lacking this. We need more of these type of guests. It's very much a thing to look global for a lot of these companies because, of course, in the Las Vegas Strip, there's, a finite amount of space. But hey, you know what we need? Where everybody's doing? Everybody's looking for the next country to open a property. I know when I was at MGM, the big deal was that we were selling properties, essentially the property, then getting leaseback deals, so they can build a property in Tokyo, because that's where they thought that they were going to have a lot more investment was going to be going to Tokyo, which I think didn't end up happening because COVID happened. So that made zero sense. So now everybody's owned by Blackstone. But yeah, that's always the idea is let me build something somewhere else. Macau was a huge deal. I mean, Wynn Macau, which we're talking very much about Vegas stuff. But everybody's looking for the next country. They want to make a new Vegas someplace else, which I think is sort of the problem of our current owners of the hotels. So I don't know. I think when you get people who are more focused on the local part of the city, which we'll talk about people like Derek Stevens, later in the year, I think that is the problem with the current state of Las Vegas, is that no one's looking to innovate here in this city. They want to just build what we have here someplace else and replicate it. The big place now, for those of you wondering, like what's the next country that is getting a lot of the thought here, is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and Abu Dhabi, Dubai, of building in these like special sections of the city that, you know, let you drink and gamble and all those other good things. It's sort of like, how can we tap into that? And I think that's where it's at right now. So we are going to stop there. This is going to be part one of probably 2 parts of Steve Wynn's story, in terms of like, you know, how he changed sort of the Vegas landscape. And we'll probably be talking about, of course, his next big endeavor, which was the Wynn Hotel and Casino, which that'll be on the next episode. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys enjoy. I'll see you guys around. If you see me out in town, come up and say hello. But remember, keep it confidential.